Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from the APO Secretariat Office in Tokyo. Thank you for joining the P-Talk today. I'm Tad Manabe, who will be anchoring this session. Today's P-Talk focuses around climate-smart agriculture. Now, the majority of the APO members are tasked to boost the food productions to meet the growing demand of the food. However, the climate changes are making many farmers difficult to maintain the current level of production. So it's challenging to boost the production under the climate change situation. So on top of that, farmers are asked to contribute to reducing the greenhouse gas emission, knowing that fact that agriculture sector is accountable for more than 20% of the total greenhouse gas emission. So we must support farmers to transform their approach toward productive and climate-smart agriculture. For this important topic, we are glad to invite Ms. Imelda Bacudo this time. She is the co-chair of Gaxa, Global Alliance for Climate-Smart Agriculture, under UNFAO. So she's now based in Bali and is actively traveling around the world, physically and virtually, to lead and guide the adoption of CSA in the region. So good afternoon, Ms. Bacudo.
Good
How are you
afternoon,
in Bali?
Dad.
How
Oh,
are you in
doing
Bali?
well. Doing well in Bali and very happy to be a part of your P Talk. And thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining this P-Talk today while you are busy in traveling around the world for many missions. And we are glad to learn from you around climate-smart agriculture with your rich experience in this area. And then because the topic is so big and the time is so limited, so I gave you 6 questions in advance. So if you don't mind, we would like to visit question by question and then appreciate your presentation for those questions. Would that be okay to go that way?
Yeah, very happy to
Thank
do
you.
so, Dad. It's my pleasure. All
Thank you.
right.
Thank you. Okay, so viewers, if you have any questions, please free to drop your questions in the chat box. So we'll accommodate your questions later on at the Q&A session. Okay, so that first of all, so could you kindly introduce yourself and Gaxa, where you are based, please?
Yes, thank you. I'd be happy to do so. Good afternoon from Bali, as Dad has mentioned. It's my pleasure to introduce CSA as a means to achieve productivity. And I would like to firstly introduce the Global Alliance for Climate Smart Agriculture, which was launched by the UN Secretary General in New York in 2014. So the term has existed, CSA, in 2010, but the Global Alliance, was born in 2014. It's a multi stakeholder platform with extensive membership ranging from governmental organizations, NGOs, farmer organizations, private sector organizations, research bodies, civil society, and many others. There's 8 years of experience already of Gaxa, especially in strengthening regional alliances that promote CSA. For until 2032, we just came up with our priorities and thematic areas. Thematic area 1 would be on sustainable agriculture. Thematic area 2 will be resilience building and climate change adaptation. And thematic area 3 will be on innovation and technology. And through knowledge sharing and membership and alliances, we're really hoping to focus on these 3 strategic areas. Over to you, Tad-san.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for introducing Gaxa. While the Gaxa's role is at the global level and it's broad, But this time, I like to focus on Asian Pacific region for our viewers. And my next question probably is around the understanding the situation in the region, Asian Pacific. So could you
Right.
give us the overview how the climate changes are impacting our agricultural activity in the region?
Thank you, Tad-san. So, CSA, Gaxa, all these initiatives, these are born out of realities. And it's my pleasure to share with you the context behind these initiatives. As we all know, agriculture is a very important sector in the economy of Asia Pacific. It contributes to more than 10% of the region's GDP, and it provides jobs for over one third of the working population. As we all know, nearly three-fourths of the poor reside in rural areas, and a large majority of them is dependent on agriculture. While agriculture is very important, we also understand that agriculture is actually at the front line or the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. We know that there's a lot of residents and citizens along very long coastlines who are heavily dependent on the coastlines and therefore are very impacted because they are in low lying areas and making the region one of the most vulnerable to weather extremes and rising sea levels associated with global warming. In fact, in terms of productivity, there is a study from the Asian Development Bank that if the impacts continue, rice yields, for example, would drop by as much as 50% by 2100 in comparison with the 1990 levels. It to moreover, the global pandemic has also put a strain on the supply chain across borders. And as we all know as well, the war or the invasion of Ukraine has also put pressure on the supply chain, and we are already feeling the impacts of this as we feel the rising cost of fuel as well as the shortage of feeds and fertilizers. So, therefore, future anticipated climate change will risk reversing productivity gains and the improvements for food security and nutrition across South Asia, Southeast Asia, and the whole of Asia will be impacted. In summary, we know that agriculture plays a really direct impact to climate change or suffers from the direct impacts of climate change. But we also know that agriculture is not just vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, it's also contributor to the greenhouse gas emissions that causes climate change impacts. It is therefore part of the problem and an important part of the solution. So we know, for example, that 17% of greenhouse gas emissions come through agriculture activities, and additional 7 to 14% through land use changes. And what are these agriculture activities? A huge majority comes from rice and livestock. Um, so we know that agriculture is both part of the problem and also part of the solution. Therefore, increasing resilience of the agriculture of the agriculture sector, we hope to also strengthen food security. I think, Tad, I stop here for this for to answer your question. Over to you.
Thank you very much. So it is quite shocking to know that rice yield could be reduced by 50% in 20 to 100. So that is quite shocking. And also that it's shocking that agriculture is not impacted by the climate change, but also impacting to the climate change. So, so that aspect, then I feel that climate smart agriculture practice is more important now and for the future to address those challenges. So maybe the next my question is like to know more about the concept of climate smart agriculture (CSA). So I heard that there are three pillars of CSA. So could you elaborate about the concept of the CSA, please?
Thank you. Thank you, Tad. At this point, I also wanted to say that CSA is one of the approaches that we could utilize. And there are many approaches. So, what is CSA? CSA is actually looking at three pillars. Some of the things that are expected of us now that our countries have signed the Paris Agreement and are hoping to contribute to the global ambition of lowering the temperature to 1.5 degrees. So, and but meanwhile, while our countries made these commitments, we are also aware that farmers need to continue sustaining themselves and possibly increase their income. So, therefore, we looked at the three pillars of climate smart agriculture as supporting adaptation measures or increasing resilience, while looking at the possibility to lower greenhouse gas emissions or mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, and at the same time ensuring that farmers sustain their income through these practices. Actually, climate smart agriculture is not new. A lot of our farmers, of course, are the very first ones to adapt to the changing impacts, to the changing climate. Um, and here is a collection of some of the practices that are actually part of CSA. For example, use of varieties resistant to drought, salinity, pests and diseases, other climate related stress, integrated farming systems. We know over decades, our farmers and with government support and NGO support has been in promoting integrated farming systems, crop diversification, including crops and commodities. One very good example is rice shrimp farming in the Mekong River Delta. Improve crop management measures during crop growth and development. Example of this is alternate wetting and drying in rice, use of technological advances and science-based knowledge. Cropping calendar is an age-old example of CSA, and other innovations such as digital innovations. There, I mentioned RISE, which is using remote sensing in implementing an agriculture insurance system, and manure management for lowering methane. So these are some examples of CSA that are actually already being implemented. But the main thing to consider is that three pillars. We wanted to at least encourage adaptation, look at mitigation potential, while ensuring that farmers continue earning a living from these practices. Over to you, Tad.
Thank you very much. So now I understand the triple goals of the CSA, and also learned that we have the available tools ready, so we are not reinventing the wheels. So I like to move to the next question, that linking to that, but I really like to understand the key success factors. So you introduced a couple of tools to make the CSA we are advanced in the region in the Asian Pacific. What are the key success factors based on your experience so far? So could you share us with the probably you would say the critical enablers in the region, please?
All right. So, Tad, as I mentioned earlier, these are not new practices, but the approach sort of unified them into three pillars so that both our national commitments and our commitments to the farmers are already taken in one approach. Um, but so, because it's not new, there are a lot of examples, especially coming from Africa, where organizations like the Center for International Tropical Agriculture collated lessons learned from existing CSA practices. And here are some lessons learned for successful implementation of CSA. This one is a CSA approach or a project should have equitable, climate smart agriculture policies, meaning everybody is included. There should be gender inclusion, assessment of whole farm trade offs and synergies, support from farmer to farmer and community wide social learning. Number five, know the drivers of the adoption of climate smart agriculture. What are the factors that will make it be adopted? And I'm just saying this now, but I will explain this one by one afterwards. Target the pathways or define the pathways to scale up so that the practice is not just in one small area. Prioritize. There are many climate smart agriculture options. And so we want to have a look at prioritization as well. Then, number eight, the often forgotten aspect is that really investing for long term benefits in climate smart soil and land health. We often neglect soil and land health. And number nine, of course, is monitoring the impacts with real time participatory tool. So let's go to policy as one of the enabling factors. It would be really good to have enabling policy frameworks. And if you look at the picture on the left side, that's one of the outputs of ASEAN or the Association of Southeast Asian Nation, which they produce a guideline to guide implementers on how to go one by one with several CSA practices. So an example, these kind of policy tools and outputs is creates an enabling environment that supports the implementation of CSA. So here are examples of regional policy making coming from ASEAN. In this way, we are really recognizing that there are CSA approaches being implemented in the ground, and that we hope that these policy tools will be able to provide those who wanted to venture into it with some sort of guidance. These are also an example of adaptation steps. What are the adaptive capacity per practice? So this is also an example of a policy tool that will create assessment level for looking at adaptive capacity of specific practices. At the local level, when you say, oh, that seems very big at the regional level, but when I give you an example of an inclusive and supportive environment through policy making at the local level, this was done by local government units in the Philippines, where they integrate climate change adaptation, and they call it CRA, or climate resilient practices in agriculture, that went through the policies of local governance units. So, this is an example of supportive policy at the local level. The number two success factor is really ensuring that gender is included, that there is an analysis of gender roles, and that men and women are really included in every step of the way in the implementation of CSA. This does not mean that we are excluding men. It's just understanding that without men and women together, it would not lead to successful CSA implementation. Um, Here's an example of a gender responsive diagnostics and prioritization of climate smart practices. Another key another key to success is understanding farm trade-offs or cost benefit. I introduced earlier the three pillars, right? So sometimes you will be faced with options. For example, you will be looking at, if I do this particular practice, I will increase the farmer's livelihood. That's great. But then it will also increase your methane emission or your greenhouse gas emission. So you have to look at which one is or you will reduce greenhouse gas emission, but then you are also reducing the farmer's productivity and income. So understanding the trade-offs and the cost benefit is a very important step in order to reach success. The next one is really farmer to farmer learning. Here, it suggests that there's no successful initiative on CSA without farmer to farmer learning, and in fact, government initiated initiatives seems to fare less successfully than those that are really incorporating peer to peer or farmer to farmer learning in CSA. Here is a drivers of adoption, really understanding what will make greater adoption of the practices. What factors is it? Is it market access, land productivity, labor availability? What are the drivers of adoption for the particular CSA practice that you want? Land availability, labor availability, market accessibility, or government incentives, what kind of drivers of adoption are going to be are going to be at play in order for the practice to be adopted. And pathways for scaling out. You know that there's no success if it just stays with 5 farming households or 10 farming household. But it is also very important to define who is going to or what are the processes in order for these to be scaled out to further neighbors or to a bigger scaling out. And this is one of an important factor for success. Prioritization, as I mentioned, there are multitude and variety of practices, and it's important that each approach you understand the priorities or the benefits of each approach, and therefore what are the benefits that will stand the most. There is a prioritization tool where on the left you look at all your CSA options, you look at the benefits of all the CSA options, and naturally choose the best bet options. One of the important factor to look at here is one where do you get support, technical and financial support in order to implement a particular CSA tool. Better soil and land health, this is really important when you're looking at increasing agriculture productivity. Please do consider if the CSA practice will also lead towards long-term investment on increasing land productivity and building on farm resilience, and eventually, of course, contributing to climate change adaptation and mitigation. There are now many initiatives looking at soil health management. In fact, the possibility also of soil carbon capture and potential for carbon market for the credits in the carbon capture in your soil. And lastly, real-time monitoring tools. You wanted to get essential feedback to ensure that projects are on track in a timely way, essentially by ensuring fast-moving CSA interventions. All right, Tad, these are the 9 success key factors based on an assessment of several CSA practices across the regions from Africa to Latin America.
Thank you very much. So it's quite good to learn about the key 9 success factors based on the experience around the world. So this should be a good list of considerations for the member countries to implement the CSA further on. So thank you very much. This is very informative. So now I like to move to the next question and learn from the example. So if you, I believe that you have some good success cases from the region. So could you share some examples?
Yes, there's a lot of happening in the region, and I'll be happy to share from policy level down to accessing financing in order to support that. May I look at my slides again? Thank you. Thailand, for example, they had this whole package of CSA practices. So they did an analysis first of an analysis of different CSA approaches, benefits, and what are their end targets. So Thailand actually had a more comprehensive plan looking at all the CSA practices with an end target of really looking at nationally appropriate CSA practices for implementation nationwide. So this is an example. This is from support from FAO Regional Asia Pacific. And then there is the ASEAN Climate Resilience Network, which was formed out of the Ministries of Agriculture Research Development departments, in which they wanted to have a greater promotion of climate friendly agriculture practices and specifically CSA. So the ASEAN Climate Resilience Network is an example of an enabling contributor to the promotion of CSA. There's several work areas. Knowledge exchange is foremost amongst the work, including accessing technical and financial support. Some of the pictures always speak better, right? So here are examples of Thai and Lao farmers exchanging information on stress tolerant maize variety, an example of an exchange of training of trainers in Indonesia, and an exchange regionally of all countries in Southeast Asia, exchanging information on climate information services for use in agriculture and looking at the best practices in the use of climate information services coming from the meteorological departments and how information can be better accessed by the agriculture sector. These are examples, as I mentioned, of policy guidelines. And one example that may not be directly part of CSA, but is actually impacting policies is the creation of the negotiating group for agriculture. Because before, the ones who negotiate at the UNFCCC level or the United Nations Framework Condition for Climate Change, this has often been the turf of the ministries of environment. But here we thought, let's capacitate agriculture to really discuss relevant agriculture policies that will increase their productivity while at the same time supporting the commitment to lower emissions and promote adaptive capacities. So here is an example of group of agriculture policymakers shaping policies at the UNFCCC level. And here they are. We hope that their support for all these countries we will really feel the impact and support for more climate friendly agriculture practices now that they are shaping policies at such a multilateral environmental agreement level. Another example I wanted to show to you that we hope can really open up scaling up of these practices is this multi-country readiness and preparatory proposal for the agriculture sector readiness in order to target climate finance and private sector investments, create business plans that will support some of the CSA practices that I mentioned earlier. So we hope that this proposal will now be approved within this year. And six countries, Cambodia, Laos, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, will be able to create investment plans in order to support a lot of their CSA practices. And within the region, we are again looking at best practices. We are looking at the transformation of the agriculture sector to more productive, but at the same time, adaptive and low emissions food system. There's a lot of activities happening in the region, and this is just an example. Lastly, there's actually an exercise we did. We asked, how do you view the vision? How do you view 2050? If some of you may know, 2050 is some of the is a prime target for when our countries make commitments, not only to increase productivity, but really to achieve productivity through net zero or net neutrality. So, in order to reach this center of this painting or this sketch, we asked a lot of Asian representatives who attended one meeting, and in order to have a vision of how CSA play, but what do you want to see in the future? What is it for? What is CSA for? And they mentioned a lot of catchphrases for 2050, such as no pollution, renewable energy, less emission, agroforestry, rich biodiversity. They also mentioned, so in short, it seems that the future that we are seeing, where all this productivity should be aimed towards, should be able to produce a vision that is resilient, biodiverse, pollution free agri food system that provides healthy and nutritious food for all by 2050 in Asia. So this seems like the overall vision of where we wanted to go, where productivity should be focused on as well. And we see it with all these key drivers of change, from policy to finance, technology, and innovation. These are identified as key drivers of change, and this could be brought about by engaging with key stakeholders, and key stakeholders are farmers, government, researchers, international NGOs, and technical support. So this seems like in one picture where we are hoping to end up, and the reason why we are trying to support implementation of CSA and why we are adhering for higher productivity but resilient and pollution free. So over to you, Tad.
Thank you very much for several good examples. So I see that there are many stakeholders being involved, the government people or organization groups is like-minded, and farmers group, and they, even I saw the inclusiveness. I mean, the females are actively participating in the workshops from your pictures. So the key enablers that you have mentioned are all embedded in of the examples that you shared with us. So thank you very much. So those are the good examples. Uh, Thank you very much. Okay, so I like to move to the last question. So with the experience, uh, based on those information and activities or experience that you had, may I ask you to share with your views on how to accelerate CS in the region from your viewpoints as a summary of the presentation today?
Thank you very much, Tad, for giving me this opportunity to give my personal views on lessons learned in trying to work with farmer organizations and governments and CSOs. So may I get into my last slide, please? Thank you. So, what I realized is that there's so many of us out there trying to do different things, but for the same goal, right? We wanted to lower emissions, we wanted to increase adaptive capacities, and of course, ultimately, we wanted to help the smallholder farmers to gain productivity, higher productivity, so that we will have food security. So let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's understand who are the players out there and what can we do to synergize and work together. How is your intention gonna add value to the overall picture that I just mentioned, right? So working together and partnership is key. There's so many large players and small players, and we all need one another. Another lesson learned that I realize is finding champions. It's really good to work together, but you really need to find where the warm energy is coming from. People who are fighters, who are going to um, identify what are the challenges and then try to solve it together with you. Um, Here I said identify and find support. Is it lack of finances? Is it lack of technological know how? Is it lack of support from grassroots level? You really need to identify this. And then once you have engaged in a promotion of CSA, try to reflect and understand the lessons learned and then innovate. Really, innovation, there's a lot of innovations happening right now. And some of them are not even multi-million dollar supported projects, but are really small scale, but amazing innovation. My favorite here is the use of black soldier flies to reduce food waste. I really like that example. And then, you will find that there are a lot of opposition as well on the term CSA when it first came out. The same opposition are now opposing the term food system. So I would say be very flexible and harmonize terms with CSA. Or if it doesn't suit, if some people are quite averse to the term CSA, then just remove CSA as a term. Just understand the principles behind it, supporting farmers' productivity, supporting the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and promoting adaptive capacities. Those are the very important pillars to remember. It doesn't matter what kind of term is being used. A lot of the new terms right now are quite also very good. Promotion of agroecology, uh, nature-based solutions. There's a lot of new terms, and I think if we all focus on the goal, that's the most important thing. And lastly, really remember your passion, and the heart of the issue is putting farmers at the center. So over to you, Tad, and those are my last. Finally, here as well a summary. I'm also on the advisory committee of the Agroecology and Safe Food Transition Project over in ASEAN with support from CIRAD, and I'm also a convener of the ASEAN Climate Resilience Network. Thank you, Tad, for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. Excellent presentation, very informative and great points based on your real life experiences. Thank you. And actually, there's some viewers asking if they could have a look at the slides later on. So it seems like the slide decks are so informative to the participants. Thank you so much. Okay, here we would like to move to the Q&A session. So firstly, for viewers, if you have questions, please feel free to submit your questions in the chat box. Okay. And at this point of time, then I like to pick up some questions already received. So first question, let me see the first question from Mr. Marcus Barber from Australia. Okay, Dad, I hope you can find the questions
Yeah,
correct.
yeah,
Okay,
I
so
see
how
that.
does the UNFA all deal with the different cultural aspects of certain crops? Becomes it less or more viable? And how are climate interventions going to deal with native culture shift for changing to be embraced?
Really fantastic questions.
Hmm.
Do you want to read more questions or
Oh yeah, Chris, let's go one by one. Yes, if you don't
oh,
mind.
okay, so Mr. Barber, thank you for the question. Um, Perhaps to approach this question, let's go first with the structure of the UN, right? So, so the UN is an United Nations of normally 197 or so parties, um, and you are asking at the local level, right?
Share the
So
slides.
so if it's a question about FAO has offices at the national level, and these national level offices also work with grassroots organizations and civil society organizations and farmers associations. So definitely, cultural acceptability is one of a key factor before implementing anything. So we don't want. There has been so many case studies of wiping out local or how do you call it? The word escapes me right now. Traditional varieties are wiped out over in favor of another. So that is a scenario that is trying to be prevented. Um, Climate interventions going to deal with needed cultural shifts for change to be embraced. Yeah, we start with some of the transformative action that are easily acceptable. And of course, are investments into long term acceptability of several other things. But coming from a region where it seems that there's a lot of desire to try something new if the needed support are there. So farmers, my in my experience, farmers seems to be open to accessing new approaches and new technologies or skills if there is support for it and if they really see the benefit of switching to these new practices. If there are also incentives for this switch to these practices. I was just in a meeting
So
of
we'll
the
go
Asia
with
Farm.
next question. Alisa
Okay. I just wanted to mention the use of potential fiscal incentives or financial incentives for switching. So we are also exploring these possibilities. Over to you, Tad.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. So I'd like to move on to the next question from Mr. Arleta Anti from Iran.
Yeah.
Okay, let us show the question on the banner. Could you please talk around the relation of the CSA with the IoT and AI? So the digital technologies, how that is contributing and potentially contributing for the advancement with CSA. Could you share your view on this
Yeah,
subject?
digitalization is an increasingly important aspect, and within the ASEAN ministers of agriculture and forestry, for example, there's a huge focus now on digitalization. But this was again cultural friendly or easy to be absorbed digitalization. I mentioned an example earlier of rice, RIICE, and this is a rice crop insurance program that uses satellite imagery in order to reduce cost and be more efficient in support of crop protection and risk management for farmers in terms of extreme weather events. There are so many examples. Yesterday, I was just talking with a private sector group that is measuring land use and in rice in Myanmar, and also utilizing digital technology to measure land use and greenhouse gas emissions coming out of that. It's a very exciting field. There's many examples. Also, the utilization of climate information services that will allow farmers to access much needed climate information as soon as possible. So there
Mm.
is very much a direct relation.
Thank you very much. Maybe if I remember correctly, one of the slides showing that about the driver for adoption, then I see that marketing information and weather information, those are really a driver across the many several countries. So which
Yeah,
probably the IT technologies could help the farmers.
right. Yeah. And in the insurance, which is part of risk
Insurance.
mitigation measures.
I see.
um yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Right. So another question is around the obstacles or barrier. We talked around enablers, success factors. From your experience so far, what could you describe around key barriers or obstacles that
Mm.
make you stop for doing this?
Yeah, I think I'm inspired by Marcus, Mr. Barber's question, And I think one of the barrier or the opposite of adoption is the slow acceptance, right? One could be the lack of incentives. Either it is not producing any, it's not leading towards a productive target. It's not increasing their productivity, or they are not getting anything out of it. So I mentioned earlier, I was at the Asia Farmers Association made of 22 countries, and they're looking at an example in Indonesia where the switch to organic practices or sustainable agriculture practices actually should be given financial incentives. And right now, perhaps I'm not saying this is the answer. Perhaps, for example, carbon trading that has just been, the rule book for it has just been finalized in COP26. Perhaps it can offer one of the suggested methodology for higher adoption. So, as I said, lack of incentive is one, lack of technical know how. And again, rooted to what Mr. Barber's question was formulated. Sometimes, if it's contrary or it's not cultural enough for them to make a switch, it's also a barrier. And it owes to lack of technical understanding or lack of technical support. It's probably a very um, foreign incentive. And then when I look at my favorite CSA approaches like black soldier flies, it is compounded by lack of initial financial investments.
Mm.
So this is also one of the major factor that contributes to lack of adoption or slow adoption of CSA technologies and approaches. Over
Thank
to
you.
you, Tad.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your view. Okay, so there's another question from Mr. Ahmad Salahuddin. Very often, we see the focus around CSA and it has lost the great agenda of productivity gain. So always the balance
Uh,
of CSA versus the productivity, which is one of the key topic here today. So how can we make sure that it doesn't happen anymore? How can we secure the productivity? I think that is one of the key messages that you are delivering to. But could we discuss one more time to address his
yeah,
question?
Mr. Salahuddin, I am very grateful for your question. And in fact, it made me immediately reflect on why is that? Because it seems like, when we make discussions on climate impacts, and when you look at those who go to COP 25, 26, these are all climate change experts, but we don't have the business people or we don't have the farmer productivity people. I mean, if you ask APO, do you come to climate change conferences? They're not there. So it seems like the relations between climate discourse and the technological know-how on made for facing the impacts of climate change is very much there's a gap between the productivity. And so that is very correct. I would say that how to bridge this would be to actually, I'm very glad, for example, that APO reached out to me in order to bring climate change into productivity issues and vice versa. So I think we need to do more of these dialogues and need to really emphasize, and as well as from my climate change perspective, really look at the productivity issues. I think it starts with policies, with the academic communities as well, and with the practitioners, because oftentimes a lot of the CSO language, the development partners language, the INGO language, and the government's language is always just about impacts of climate change, when in fact it will only happen when farmers productivity um, is also included. So I really think that we really do need to emphasize it more through more of this sectoral work. We need to also remove the borders of our bureaucracies, because productivity issue is often put at the Minister of Economic Planning, etc. And the Ministry of Agriculture is often just looked at as a food production area. And climate change is then somewhere else as well. So we really need to break down the barriers of these both discourse and bureaucratic barriers. I hope I'm able to answer your question, which is very profoundly put together.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so let me pick up one more question from the chat. There's one question from Marcus. Uh, Thank you for the question, your question again. So does the UNFAO have anything to say about the crop replacement? Should some
Yeah,
countries move from rice to salmonella or from corn? Crop? Okay.
Marcus, it's a very exciting question because I've often been in the middle of this. And honestly, I think it is not within FAO to dictate, because often international or UN agencies are often neutral in terms of national determination, right? So it's the national countries who will determine. But there is always a very lively discourse. A lot of I could tell you right now that most of the governments representing their countries often tell me, because Southeast Asia, for example, is coming from emerging economies. It's only now that we are coming from poverty and into big dragon economies at the moment. Oh boy, switching to lab grown protein won't happen in the near future. Everyone is enjoying their meat at the moment. uh, and what's happening now is supporting low emissions livestock, for example. From my personal view, I and a nerd point of view, I'm really watching out on the developments on low emissions livestock. I saw some promise in the feeding cows some sort of seaweed that will lower their methane gas emissions. So these are, but it's not up to FAO to dictate crop replacement. But as a technical UN agency, it's to offer options out there. But it's always national determination. But it's always good to have these options as offered. All right, over to you, Tad.
Okay, thank you. So,
Yeah, I'm sorry. Just
go ahead.
yes, Marcos. Yeah, seaweed. Actually, this practice I've heard from New Zealand livestock expert. Yes, indeed. It's good. This kind of setup, it's look like we're talking to one another now with the audience. Yes, the seaweed production. I'm watching out for that. Although the adoption for this low emissions target with seaweed farming is very met with a lot of challenges. They say that this particular seaweed is very expensive. So we don't know. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to pick up one more question from the chat from Ahmad Salahuddin. So could you pose the question? Okay. So do you think that we also need to come close among the practitioners dealing with the similar concept, such as CSA, natural farming, ecological farming, etc.? So how can we accommodate those and work together with the different practice into one? They have you.
Yeah, I think the answer is yes, and I think we have started. In fact, one of our focal points from the ASEAN Climate Resilience Network, she's tired of all the new terms. She created a table that says, here are all the terms: nature-based solution, family-centered farming, agroecology, biodiversity. So I think it's really important to have a goal. And these terms are also, one of the reality is also funder driven. If the funder decided that they want to use a particular new term, good agriculture practice or GAP. That's also what they use, but let's just use all the term. And for CSA, we're emphasizing that the focus is on really trying to deal with the impacts of climate change. But I am, for one, very much into understanding, being clear with the goal, and being able to be flexible to use all sorts of terms. And there are so many. I'm also sitting as one of the board for the agroecological transformation for food system. So that is also this is also a need to really make everyone understand. And I think it's also the fault of FAO for also keep um, changing and creating new terms. So I think the challenge now is to harmonize all of these.
Mm. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so the time is up, but I like to pick up the last question from the chat. There's a question from Jill Zaman about how to manage water scarcity and water management system. So this links somewhat to my question around the rice. You know that in the Asia Pacific region, rice is one of the important crop, and also, if my understanding is correctly, this is also impacting the greenhouse gas emission for some extent. So, and also the question from the viewers saying that we must secure the productivity, the income for the farmers with the CSA adoptions. So, I heard you have some example or a good case in the rice to achieve those challenges at the same time. So, could you give us the case, including the water management as well?
All right. So I think that Mr. Zaman, I don't have the whole time and the technical capacity to really discuss water management. I have a very generalist point of view of agriculture and climate smart agriculture. But in terms of marrying this with the question on rice in the Southeast Asia, and I think in South Asia as well. The system called alternate wetting and drying, where the traditional
So then closing with the
flooding.
last question from
Okay, where so alternate wetting and drying is one of the practices in rice production that is being promoted, in which it's lowering methane gas emissions, and it's avoiding the annual flooding of rice paddy fields in order to avoid a lot of the methane gas emissions. So I think that is one. And even here where I'm sitting in Bali, in terms of water management, there are many traditional water irrigation system very much embedded in the Balinese local culture, such as the subak system, for example. So we really need to bring water and soil as an all-encompassing factor in resource management system underneath these climate approaches that we are doing. Back to you, Tad.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So time is running up, but please allow me to give one more last question. So
Oh,
how can viewers here receive further support or information from the leading organization like Gaxa or ASEAN CRN to promote CSA in the member countries?
all right. Um, I would like to take this opportunity as the last question and probably the last comment to introduce how we work. Both GAXA as a global alliance and the ASEAN Climate Resilience Network as a regional network work towards more like a broker. It sits in the middle between the science community that has all the technological support and innovation and the policymakers, but we're also in touch in trying to access climate finance. So please do get in touch if you have a proposal, for example, that needs collaboration. We could find the right resources and the right approaches, or not the right, but one of the many options to approach a particular challenge that you might have posed as your particular problem. So we are hoping that and these doors are very much open to everyone. There is no needed membership. And with, for example, the presence of World Business Council for Sustainable Development as part of Gaxa, we're also open to trying to bridge your ideas and your approaches with private sector financing. So and partnership. So it's this is some do get in touch, or do get in touch with APO as well. And we hope that I think I'm getting a takeaway message from this discussion is really elevating the issue of productivity together with the issue of climate change. So we need your expertise on productivity to penetrate our climate change discourse. So please, let's move towards partnerships and collaboration. Back over to you, Tad.
Thank you very much. Definitely, yes, we like to collaborate to bring this important agenda move forward. And that again, thank you very much for your excellent presentation and the responses to the questions. So those are all informative and insightful. And as always, I'm always inspired with your passion and spirit for this climate change and climate smart agriculture matter. So I feel your energy and spirit. Thank you very much as always. Okay,
Thank you, Tad.
thank you.
By the way, we also have a lot of activities in the region, and we hope that some of the people who are really actively talking on the comment section through APO, we hope to really reach out, and we also hope to
Good.
publicize some of the events as we go towards decarbonization of agriculture and higher productivity. Thank you.
Yes. So during our session, then there's a lot of chats. Dark chat was very active. So after this session, that I hope you can go through the chats and how people are actively communicating during this session. Thank you very much. And viewers, I'd like to thank for all of your viewing and active participation to the chat. Thank you very much. And some of you requested the presentation. So if you like to receive, so upon the approval from Dada, then we like to share to those who like to see. So please check the email address in the PTalk session here. Then there is an email addressing to us. So just let us know. And also, if you really like to work with us for this agenda, please also email us how we can help you together with the Dada's initiative as well. Okay, thank you very much to Dada again, and thank you for viewers. And hope we visit again face to face or virtually to advance this important topic forward. Thank you, and please stay safe, everyone, and hope that you join us again in the future talk, including you, Dada.
Goodbye,
Thank you very much.
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, APO.
Thank you.